YOLO. Check, check. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a tagger by the toe. 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or less. Anything? Check, check.
That's good. Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Whew. Sorry, I'm blinded by the light, and I think that's the name of a song somewhere in my recent past. So welcome, and it's so good to see all of you here in person. And for those of you who were in the previous meeting, I'm sorry if you're going to get some repetitive action here, because I am going to go through the most recent events and the successes that we've had in our gatherings here at ACT-IAC. So the first thing I wanted to do was to say, at the heart of our organization, of course, is the ability to convene and the ability to pull together the industry and government executives, create thought leadership, solve big problems, talk it all out, as you will. And some of the most recent examples of that include, and this one was surprising to me because I come from OMB, and I remember some of these big compendiums that we produce at OMB as being the bane of my existence in terms of me having to review every line and every word of those. But in actuality, we held a session on A123, and it was probably one of the most widely attended events that we had in ACT-IAC history, which was kind of a fun fact for me. In addition, we had the Digital Transformation Summit with GSA, which they asked us to co-sponsor and help them lead. And that was completed in March. We had 365 people at that one. The Women in Leadership Forum in April, it was completed, and 182 registered, 131 government, and 51 industry. The Shared Services Summit, which we just completed, and leading up to that, I actually participated. We had 3 rounds of prep roundtables, I guess you would call them, where we pulled together some thought leaders from our community, and we talked through what should the threads and the discussion topics be for the summit itself. And that went very well. It was the first time we'd done it that way. It was done in partnership with the Shared Services Leadership Conference. And they are really a great partner for us, and we will probably do something like that again in the future. The Health Innovation Summit was in May 5th, and we had 48 registered, 12 government, 34 industry. And of course, our big mid-year conference is upcoming in 2 weeks. If you haven't registered, I would highly recommend that you do so. I think the hotel rooms were in short supply, so we definitely are filling up on that one. I also wanted to let you know that our financial performance is actually very stellar this year. We have cracked at least a little bit of the code on how to run a really good hybrid conference, and particularly cutting our teeth on ELC last year. And just in the previous meeting, we were discussing that there are likely to be waves and surges in COVID, and we can't say with certainty when those are going to occur or how they are going to occur or what the impact is going to be. But we do know for certain that we have managed to give ourselves at least one trial run and run it successfully. So we have the confidence to know that we can go into whatever is thrown our way and be able to completely continue our business as usual. Finally, I wanted to say our financial performance was really good. We are ahead in terms of the budget. We are ahead in terms of cash flow. And the conversation again at the previous meeting was, okay, what are we going to do with that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we have the right reserves in place so that if we do have to weather any more of these COVID outbreaks, that we can do so effectively. And then once that is taken care of, then there is an opportunity for opening up new channels for us to engage. New channels, new topics, new ways of engagement. We've done a few of those in the last couple of years, including podcasts, radio shows, different kinds of social media, better ways to get our message out to our community. And those are all on the table for us going forward. So new and different is definitely encouraged. We have our planning session coming up in mid-July, and that's the time at which we will discuss what the next year is going to look like in terms of both our priorities and how we actually execute against those priorities. And the most important thing I wanted to leave you with is, and if we can go to the slide, we have been very successful in bringing on new members this year. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank those new members for joining this organization. We know that you have a lot of areas where you can expend your scarce time. And we are very proud that you have chosen ACT-IAC as part of your executive presence, because we are an all-volunteer army, and your expertise, your capability makes this organization richer and makes our conversation richer. So I thank you for joining. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dave Wintergren.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. For all of you here in the room, it's great to see you all in person. For those of you following along at home, we're delighted to have you too. We do live in a hybrid world and will continue to be that way. The advantage of being here is you get to do a little hobnobbing with each other after the event. We'll have a little reception afterwards. And so we'll get a chance to catch up, because it just seems like it's been forever since we've gotten to get together in person. And so we're delighted to see you. We do have a lot of things going on in person though. And so we do encourage you to come back, come out of your houses, come out of your home offices, come back out. As Margie pointed out, we had a couple of great conferences last couple of weeks. Our partnership with the Shared Services Leadership Coalition, they're so delighted with it. They have already asked us to make sure we do it again with them next year. So we'll be doing the Shared Services Summit with them again last year, and then our Health Innovation Summit last week too. And so I think collectively we have to remind people to come back out and get back involved. There's a lot of great things to participate in. If we go to the next slide, I promise you, I'm not going to talk to you this slide, but I just want you to know that this slide's available for all of you. And this is sort of like ACT-IAC in a placemat, in an infographic. There are so many ways to get engaged. And at our executive committee meeting a few moments ago, we talked about our communities of interest and our Institute for Innovation. They're just delivering really first-class reports, work products, capability, maturity models, primers. And so, you know, if you're not involved in those groups, you should be. You could be. Even if you don't have time to be involved in the working groups and you want to be a beneficiary of the products, come to the website and check it out. In the last few months, we released reports on digital transformation, identity management, customer experience, the use of synthetic health data, improving emerging technology acquisition outcomes. So there's a lot of good, important work going on through the communities of interest. But wait, there's more. If the communities of interest are our centers of gravity for the functional view of government, then our federal insight exchanges are the organizational view. And I'm just delighted to report to you that we now have 15 federal insight exchanges. They are down there at like 7 o'clock on your clock there on the slide. Federal insight exchanges are agency focused. We just added EPA as a new agency. So there are 15 agencies. Another great way to get involved, focus on the priorities of that agency, upcoming acquisition opportunities, upcoming priorities for the organizations. So, so don't forget that. But oh wait, there's more. There's a number of working groups. We have a Cybersecurity Supply Chain Risk Management Acquisition Working Group, which is our longest acronym at the moment, the CSCRIM AWG. Some of the leaders for that effort are here in the room with you. If you'd like to learn more about that, I encourage you to find them at the reception afterwards. It's an awesome partnership with the government group that's working on crucial issues about supply chain. We've launched a climate change working group, so you might want to be involved in that. And recently, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee has come to us and asked us to serve as a facilitator for their IT Modernization Caucus that they've started. So we will be providing speakers for those quarterly events as well. So lots of things going on. If you need to catch up, go to the website. I would also just do 2 crass commercial plugs. The Buzz, our podcast, just finished a really interesting series on innovation and acquisition in the federal market. So I encourage you to reach out and check out The Buzz. And then Accelerating Government, our monthly radio show, also available through their website that's on Federal News Network, has gotten some really interesting guests. We interviewed John Cotter, famous change icon. So you can hear more about what he's thinking and what's in his new book. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. And I encourage you to do that. It is that time of year for those of you on the Industry Advisory Council side. It's time for our election. We elect board officers every year. And so we could go to the next slide. I'll just let you know that you'll see more about this. There'll be announcements about this in the news flash. But we are at a wonderful moment this year because we have 5 vacancies on the executive committee, and they're all filled by people who are serving and are eligible to serve for a second term. And they're all doing outstanding jobs. And they're all listed on that slide. Our vice chair for finance, Tim Cook, and then 4 of our vice chairs at large, Jonathan Bennett, Anne Marie Johnson, Ellen Kuhn, and Kelly Morrison. And so it's the unanimous perspective of both the IAC nominating committee and the IAC executive committee that we should give those folks an opportunity to serve another term. So you'll see more about that in the election news that comes up, and they'll be voting the industry points of contact. Have to vote yes or no on the slate of candidates later on in June. So stay tuned for more information on that. And so lots of stuff going on for ACT-IAC. I am happy to find any of you later on. If there's something you heard about today that you'd like to get involved in, we'll connect you with the right people. I'll be around. You know how to find me. And so without further ado, we're going to move on to the next part of our agenda. And so I'm delighted to ask Sashi Goli, who's a Navitas Business Consulting, and importantly for today, the chair of our DHS, Federal Insight Exchange team, to come on up on stage and introduce our guest speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? All right. I'm Shashi Goli with Navitas Business Consulting. Thanks for joining today's event on building a culture of innovation. I'd like to introduce our panelists, Rob Brown, and also Clay Goldwine. Great.
Thanks, Sashi.
Rob and Clay, welcome. Thanks for making time out of your busy schedule. Really appreciate it. So I'd like to do a quick introduction of Rob and Clay, and then we'll get started. So Rob is Chief Technology Officer at DHS USCIS for a few years now, and he has a couple of decades of experience in leadership roles for federal government and industry. And we have Clay Goldwine, Senior Vice President at CGI Federal, and he is leading a business unit by the name of National Security and Justice, and he has experience leading several federal agencies, including DOJ and DHS. Without further ado, we'll get started. I'm excited to be moderating this event for sure, and this will be a fun event. So as I said earlier, this topic is today about building a culture of innovation. It's not necessarily a like emerging tech or IT transformation kind of topic. Wow. However, it is very important topic because that to me, that's the building block, essentially, for you to do anything you want without innovation. And there are many aspects of innovation. So before we get there, I'd like to start with you, Rob. Rob, if you can explain or elaborate on your responsibilities in USCIS right now, and what is something that we don't know about either about you or about your role?
Okay. Hi. Well, hello, folks. Thanks for having me today. Pleasure to see you all, and hopefully nobody falls asleep. I'll jump up and down if just wave your hand. So I am currently in the role of CTO over at USCIS. That place is, I think, relatively well known for its innovation through the various folks that have come through that organization. And right now, I'm just trying to continue to keep that spirit alive and continue to innovate and really continue to ensure that there's transparency and collaboration. I think those are two key roles that I try to fulfill as CTO, obviously with the technical mindset, as well as continue to experiment with new technology, as well as new frameworks as it relates to culture, as it relates to things like software delivery, as it relates to modern ways of doing operations. So some examples, we can talk about actually instituting what's called the flow framework, which is a new, relatively new modern way of trying to tackle software development with value streams. And on the operations side, really sort of a burgeoning, it's probably about less than 10 years old now, but really trying to move out and provide patterns for USCIS and others in DHS and even the federal government to try and adopt this site reliability engineering construct, and really a customer facing construct. So we're doing some experiments with that right now as well. But ultimately, as it relates to the hat that I'm wearing is a lot of it's just ensuring that we continue to deliver. We deliver quality, and it has some element of speed, which can be accomplished with various technology that we have deployed. And so something, I mean, I work at an immigration agency, the immigration agency, and I am actually from Canada. So I'm a customer as well as an employee.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, those are very definitely very good insight. So Clay, talk a little bit about more about yourself, about your role at CGI, as well as something that we don't know about you or your role.
Thanks, Shashi, and I'd like to thank ACT-IAC for having me here. As many of you know, I'm not David Larimore. He was unavailable, and I'm pitching in. But I've been at CGI for next month, it'll be 28 years. And I'm currently leading our business unit called National Security and Justice. I have a long history with the Department of Homeland Security, so I have a little bit of familiarity with some of the work that Rob's describing. Like with Rob, you know, part of my role is about delivery and making sure that we're delivering to our federal government clients. And part of it is also focused on making sure that our people are happy, that our business is growing, and that everything is kind of running smoothly. I'm a fellow. I went through the Partners Program in 2017. Last year, I was one of the industry vice chairs for Voyagers, and this year I'm one of the industry vice chairs for Partners.
That's great to hear. So I'm definitely excited to be here to be moderating this wonderful panel with distinguished guests. So what I would like to start with on the innovation culture topic, how do you define innovation? And there are multiple aspects of innovation: the innovation culture, innovation tools, innovation technology. There's so many aspects to it, and we focus on the culture, but let's start with the word innovation. So Clay, if you don't mind, what does innovation mean for you? And what does innovation culture mean to you?
Sure. So I think oftentimes when people hear innovation, they think of creating a new iPhone. And that's obviously innovation, but it's not the only form of innovation. You don't have to have something that has millions and millions of consumer purchases in order for it to be innovative. Oftentimes innovation is just finding a different way to solve a problem that exists, whether that problem is a business problem that exists, or it's a technical problem that exists, or it's just making something run a little faster, be a little bit more streamlined, satisfy a different set of requirements. And so in order to create that culture of innovation, part of it is just having the conversation and being focused on what can we do to innovate? What are the challenges that are being faced, and how do we look at getting past some of those challenges? Giving people the opportunity to take some risks, encouraging them to take some risks, and expecting that some of the time, a lot of the time, those risks are going to turn out not to have been well taken, that people are going to fail. But if they fail fast, then they can try out some other risk, and maybe that time that failure will turn into a success, and that'll provide for the innovation that's being sought after.
Thank you, Clay. Rob?
Actually, I think it's, the organization itself should have a growth mindset. I think that's really important. from an innovative culture perspective,
Mhm.
as well as the ability to do pretty deep introspection and reflection, as well as adaptation. I think those are some key elements as it relates to what you would want to strive for from a maturity perspective and having a good innovative culture. And how do you get there? I don't know. I mean, there's so many different ways. But some of the successes that I think that we have had from a federal organization is just the communication patterns and ensuring that there is, again, good collaboration, not the up the chain across and down, but try and promote folks to actually speak horizontally. And then those communication patterns that start to, or pathways that start to get worn and built, you enable more of that innovative culture because people start to communicate with each other and they share common challenges, and those pathways get larger and larger. So I think that's a core tenet of what innovation, or how to get to some sort of innovative culture.
Absolutely. I think both of you touched on many important aspects like fail fast, collaboration, introspection. And without introspection, you can't necessarily learn and innovate again. I mean, it's a building block for us to keep on.
It's not an agile ceremony.
Exactly. It's not.
It's not another
maybe
meeting. It really is. And sometimes you have to find with people, because this is a human construct. You have to find within people usually it's shared problems or challenges. For example, just recently made a great bond with somebody who's in our resource management division. And there's this lady in the CFO office that bugs the hell out of us. I mean, you wouldn't believe, and all she wants is a report monthly on end user reporting, which essentially is, what are all the folks in the organization from an end user perspective, what software are they using? So the two of us just, found this common, I shouldn't say hatred, but pretty much challenge with the CFO lady. But those sort of finding some of those shared challenges can help produce the collaboration and communication that doesn't exist. And we're now actively looking at how we can automate this process across the organization together as opposed to in silos.
Yep.
So it's we're about a quarter of the way there, and we can finally tell this lady to go look at this report.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful use case for sure. So what I would like to go next is, I think you already touched on that a little bit. So I'd like to go to Clay. So how do organizations and teams build innovation culture? Is it a concept that you already have at CGI and in CIS? I think you talked on it a little bit. If not, how can the folks we have in the audience and the government and industry side, what can they, can you share?
So I think just to build on what Rob was describing earlier, some of it is about those communication pathways, right? It's about encouraging people to talk to each other. I'm an introvert. That doesn't come naturally to me. I'm pretty happy to just sit there at my desk and not interact with people. But I know that when I interact with people, I learn things, and that provides the opportunity for those communications where I'll learn something, and that something will be useful towards innovation. And so I need to do that myself, and I also need to encourage my team to do the same thing, to talk to each other, to talk to their clients, to attend conferences like this one, and not only to attend virtually, but to attend in person and have some of those networking activities and interact with people. So you hear some things and it sparks an idea, which is something that we were all kind of used to prior to March of 2020, and now we're a little bit less used to that. In terms of the other techniques, I think one of the things that I try to do is to meet with my team members on a regular basis as a group and also individually, and not have a formal agenda. Just have a conversation with them about whatever is going on in their lives. Some of it's going to be work related, some of it's going to be personal. And through those conversations, sometimes there's just an exchange of ideas. And hey, what do you think about this? Or did you hear about that? Those types of things are likely to lead to at least discussions of challenges that exist and ideas of how to solve some of those challenges. So I think those are always valuable. And then the other thing I'll share, since you asked about CGI specifically, so in my role as a business unit leader, I meet with my colleagues from around the globe, with my peers on a quarterly basis. And what we do there is essentially knowledge sharing, but we're talking about how are we innovating for customers, and what are the ideas that we can bring from this commercial organization in a different part of the globe to the federal government, or how can we take something we're applying to the federal government and apply it elsewhere. So some of those conversations, just to kind of share ideas and an understanding of what's happening, can lead to an innovation in one area being leveraged in another area.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. I can relate to our own experience as small business, where we take experience from, let's say, USCIS and bring it to commercial and vice versa, because not all agencies and businesses are the same level in terms of innovation and emerging technology progress and all. So Rob, so what's your take on the same question?
Well, I think some of it is, I'm sure I've talked about this before, so I apologize if this is a repeat, but I'll provide maybe a real world example and experience
Sure,
of trying to tackle innovation with the organizational challenges that exist. I think first, especially, perhaps coming out of COVID and being remote for so long, and there's arguments on, are we more effective, or are we just the same, or what have you. But one thing is as we start to go back to the office, one thing is very clear: people don't want to. And so how do you deal with that? And I think this is where, from a leadership perspective and working with your colleagues even at that level, you can start to promote certain core tenets that do promote, again, just an example of being sort of innovative with the situations that are around us, to really start to, embody and develop trust with the employees and your colleagues. Further, I think you need to also have some core tenets and structure really on some of the output of the work. I think that will help provide that right balance between sort of the trust and, is this guy off doing a second job or walking his dog? So we're starting to experiment with a little bit of that. And, CAS has been lucky enough to have a pretty liberal remote work policy regardless. So we're already in that mindset. Another area, organizationally speaking, is, again, I've talked about this, Conway's law, where, as you build stuff, you're sort of building to the communication patterns of your organization. So we've been experimenting with what's called the inverse Conway's maneuver, where you essentially start to create the architecture and some of the delivery constructs as to how you want those communication patterns to change. So one of those approaches, again, has been, instead of just having multiple delivery teams where the business folks each have their own unique, favorite IT guy, we have focused around the core business facets. And it started to move the disparate, the example I have is we have like 5 case management systems. Why would we have 5? That's silly. So one approach to tackling this challenge is to, again, it seems very obvious and mundane, but it's not, is to move all of these different teams and groups that are delivering case management software into one sort of domain and organizational construct. And we're starting to see changes within how requirements are elicited and the redundancy that is now starting to be reduced so that we can start to aggregate on a case management platform. So the innovation that exists there and just having that mindset change to adopt this inverse Conway's maneuver and thinking through the right sort of organizational constructs that are reflected in what we're building, I think is pretty novel.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. So I'm thinking about 2 things here based on what you said. One is, one thing we talked about as part of the agenda is prioritize product over project. And also sometimes innovation could be thought of not part of the contract. Is what is the ROI? Why are we doing this? And seeing the benefit of it is not very obvious to start with, unless you get into it. And I think that we had to put a business case, essentially what I'm trying to get to. So it is something like, for that example.
Yeah, so we've, to the same, taking that, just think of all these different groups building 5 case management systems, and each having a different, lexicon or taxonomy for what a theme is or an epic is. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's great to empower your teams to have some flexibility, but taking a step back and looking at things corporately and what is the real business value in the bottom line, we need to have some common language, common lexicon as it relates to just from ideation all the way to deprecation. So having those constructs in place helps provide you that ability to provide that business value. And then if you bake that in to your sprints or to your Kanban, as you're actually, and again, it's not just building software, but even doing operations, as you complete a cycle and or upfront when you're working with a product owner or with your customer, if you can start to elicit either at a theme or epic, it'd be great if it was done at a user story, an actual business value metric, then that's something quantifiable that you can measure. And it's something that you can engage with the business stakeholders that's a little bit more real as opposed to doing a UAT or, it's a great product 6 months later.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so that's a very valid case, and I mean business case, and doing the business value analysis, and before you start the endeavor and getting all the stakeholders together, that definitely makes sense. I know there was some other technique that we talked about, radical enterprise, dynamic reteaming. Either of you want to talk about that just a little bit more on those two topics, or some of the techniques for the team topologies and all?
I'm happy to jump in after you. Or...
Go ahead, go right ahead.
Sorry, I feel like I'm doing all the talking here. So there's from a USDS perspective and trying to be innovative, it's great to follow in the steps of what's already been written and done, or at least some thoughts around it. So, and back to just where, some of the things I'm trying to accomplish over at CIS, taking pages from, again, team topologies, which is, if you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend it. One of the core tenets of that piece of literature is looking at platforms as products. The example I have at USCIS is we had, 250 plus Jenkins servers, which is a continuous integration, continuous delivery automation tool. Crazy. So that, and then you have all the teams to support it. Again, what a waste. So thinking about those core platforms that become table stakes, reduce that cognitive load, and then supporting it like a product and not just as a common service is really one of the core tenets of that piece of literature. The product over project really is the manifestation of the flow framework, the establishment of value teams, back to what is that business value, and really having a business partner, not being a servant to the business, but also visualizing the work and the flow of work is very important. And we're starting to actually see some value there. And again, just from ideation to, at some point we're like, this is not making any sense from a defect perspective, or even just general value of what's being asked by the business, and showing them in that flow framework where they may be off. But again, it's becoming more, it helps enhance that partnership between who's the asker and who's the builder, and becoming one. I guess the other one is the dynamic reteaming. And then from a contract perspective, we've got folks that are in and out and doing work all the time. And so dynamic reteaming is another has some tenets associated with how do you deal with the constant change, the constant flux of teams. And there's some core doctrines in there that we're trying to experiment just as either a contract changes over, or when we actually have, we have the speed contract where we actually have a bunch of different teams that we're just, here's the task, go figure it out amongst the group of you. So we're doing some experimentation there as well to see, how things are delivered. Is it fast? Is it have quality? Is there challenges? So these are some of the constructs we're trying to deploy.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I mean, building on what Rob was describing about a common service being more of a product rather than just being a service that's available there. Often what I find is that the folks who are responsible for a product, unless they make a conscious effort, they don't understand exactly how their products are being used. And so there's value in just sitting down with a set of folks who are using that product, whether it's a formal product or whether it's an informal product, and saying, hey, let me see how you're doing this. Let me see what else you're doing with this that I might not even be aware of. And oftentimes that leads to innovation because, you know, this particular customer over here is using this product in a unique way, and that can be leveraged by these other customers and built upon further.
Absolutely. I think in the one of the concepts of looking at, there was the team topologies, I think. It was about the enabling team, right? You have the enablers, and that's probably common in the agile safe methodology also, where you have a team that's working on the most complex solution and making sure make it available essentially for everybody else. I think you're kind of going there, and I'm sure there'll be definitely questions from the audience on those topics because they seem to be kind of new. I'll be kind of curious as, you know, are other components of DHS or are other agencies also looking at some advanced methodologies like that? I'll be curious.
Yeah, it's a construct of organization, and it is an innovative approach that does have some proof that the authors of that book and they most recently came out with essentially it's building an API for your team. So they have some actual tactical examples and techniques that you can use. And I think the team API, akin to like a working agreement, is also an innovative approach to organizing your team, but also the communication that can mimic, again, think of an API or a Kafka topic that I'm doing this function or this group is doing a function. Here are my APIs exposed. Well, there's rules around that. There's a contract around that. It's the same with people and team structure. Yeah. So
I love the term team API. I'll use that more.
I can send you,
Like
I'll
a
send you the
true
GitHub
CTO.
repo.
Yeah,
It's pretty cool.
yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, we deploy that on the API gateway. But I have a question for you, Clay. With ever-changing technology landscape, like how do you stay in your job? You have so many teams that your contract that you manage. How do you stay apprised on the challenges that could represent areas for innovation?
So I think a lot of it's just about having those conversations, you know, sitting in a review of the delivery of what's happening on a contract, having a conversation with a client, having a conversation with a team member, and just hearing what their thoughts are. A lot of that will come out through those informal conversations. And sure, we have some more formal, you know, processes that we go through, sometimes as required by a particular contract, sometimes internal to CGI. But I think a lot of it is just having those conversations, staying up to date. You know, it used to be management by walking around, and we can't really walk around as effectively as we used to because it's a lot farther walk, but we can still virtually walk around and just have those conversations with people and understand what's happening. And then being out there in the market, you know, attending conferences, listening to what's happening, reading the newspaper. Yeah, I still actually look at a Dead Tree edition of the newspaper and trying to understand what's occurring so that kind of up to speed that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that definitely makes sense. I think a lot of what I see is that a lot of one-on-one meetings or maybe smaller group meetings on the teams so that you get to, I mean, obviously we are back to work a little bit, but not as much as we would like. I'd like to take back on what Rob was talking about, the pre and post-COVID workplace differences. I'd like to hear your thoughts about how had the organization benefited in terms of the innovation and the culture, right, in the pre and the post-COVID, and maybe we'll go back to Rob if there's something more to add on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, there's still innovation and it's occurring differently post-COVID than it did pre-COVID. You know, pre-COVID, we would get a bunch of people into a room and they would brainstorm and people would write some things on a whiteboard and there'd be a exchange of ideas. And it's a little harder to do over technology on the internet. What I find is that there's still some of that occurs, and sometimes people say, hey, we want to be brainstorming, let's get together in a room and all drive to the office. But also there's more innovation where, you know, somebody says, hey, I got time to kill because my family's away for the night. And so I spent all this time, and you remember that process that, you know, takes 10 hours to run? Well, I found a way to get it to run in 2 instead. And, you know, here's the business value that's going to be provided. That was something they could do on their own. And that's innovation too. It's a different kind of innovation. And so I think we get value from some of that individual innovation. We also need some of that group innovation. And some of that can occur remotely. Some of that needs to occur in person at times. And so I think we just need to find a way to strike a balance there.
Absolutely. Anything else to add on that, Rob?
Just back to, we've been forced to use technology over the past whatever, which is great, especially from my perspective. But some of the changes that we have seen are greater adoption of technology, for not just by having to be forced to, but also a want and a desire. So the challenge is, how do you democratize it further? And how do you get further adoption, not just within the common table stake tools that are available, but with data or with certain tool sets? So we have seen and are continuing to push forward with, again, some of these low code, no code platforms. RPA staff, that seems to be moving along, as long as we can get security out of our way, quite well, as well as some of the other platforms like ServiceNow and Salesforce and even Power Apps within the Office 365 suite. So to me, that adoption and that want and that desire has definitely been sort of charged by the past couple of years. And so now it's incumbent upon us to think creatively and innovatively to how do we provide this in a safe manner? Because wow, some of the things we've seen are just off the wall. So that democratization of those platforms, I think, is really the next step from an innovative perspective. Because it's not, ultimately I see, crystal ball, and I see us putting ourselves out of a job a bit, because this technology will be so easy to use and so ubiquitous that now we'll just be sort of shepherds or stewards to ensure that things are being done safely, and even that could be automated.
Yep. No, that makes sense. I think more innovation is possible now because tooling available and more time the folks have potentially of not driving back and forth to work, at least not every day. I'd like to take a different spin on this topic. I guess still on the innovation culture, and we talked about it a little bit. Like part of the job of a CTO and technology leadership, right? Like you, Clay, is a little bit of firefighting. You have the executive orders coming from the top, and we have the zero trust, we have the different customer experience and all of those, and they all have a date, right? Obviously, you have your things to work on, and then you get this new requirement, if you will. So how does innovative team on innovation culture, or having that already, or building it, how does that help in potentially meeting them sooner? Because you already kind of prepared, I would think. But anyway, so I wanted to get either of you can start.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are being innovative, you're used to kind of looking at a problem and saying, how can we solve this? And oftentimes those types of things that come down, wherever they come from, they have a pretty quick fuse on them. And so oftentimes people are looking for not what is the be all end all solution that we can build in 2 years and roll out in a third, but what can we do in a month, or what can we do in a week in order to improve this situation while we buy time to work through what is some longer term setup. And I think if you've built that innovation culture, you've got a set of folks who are already used to looking at a problem and saying, well, I don't know that I can solve 100% of this, but I can solve 80% of this if we accept this assumption and this assumption. And then those assumptions can get discussed. So I think just by having that focus on innovation and looking at, okay, what are the problems that need to be solved, and how can we chew on these a little bit and work them down, it makes it a lot easier when there's some new requirement that's out there. What can we utilize that we hadn't really thought about, but we're already using in some other way to meet this particular requirement?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. Rob?
I would echo that. I mean, I think I just go back to the human element. That becomes the most important piece. Building those communities, cherishing those communities, providing the ability for folks to experiment. The example I've got is with Zero Trust. And started this Zero Trust working group back in September, I believe. And one of the core tenets of that was to establish a culture of just experimentation, which could be potentially equatable to innovation. Providing the construct, like here's here's the scientific method. Does everybody know what the scientific method is? And providing a template so we could track it, but yet folks could experiment safely to start their journey on understanding what zero trust was. So I think if you help put those sort of structures in place, or a little bit of, a step stool, especially with that experiment mindset, and because that promotes the other cultural aspect of it's okay to fail and learn, done in a safe manner in the form of an experiment. So that's been pretty useful as an example of how we've moved out on something like that. So.
Absolutely. I think the Zero Trust Working Group, I happen to have experience working with Clay and Rob for several years. I have the appreciation of what they do. And I'll say the Zero Trust Working Group, one of the aspects that we focus on is the collaboration between federal government and industry. I think, Rob, I could maybe talk a little bit about that. Maybe Clay also, how does the collaboration, obviously ideas are important from, cross-pollination essentially, but a little bit on how have you invited folks, and how has the collaboration actually helped to achieve toward the end goal?
Yeah, so over the past few months, this group, which has representation across all of OIT from each of the actual divisions, each with their own sort of being assigned their own pillar that we're taking a page out of OMB's book, as well as CISA's maturity model. We essentially created a matrix, assigned individuals to be responsible for those areas, and then elicited those folks to bring in industry to come and help us understand what industry thinks of zero trust and where it applied to those specific pillars. So that, and we've continued that for the past 4+ months. So now we've got a pretty educated federal staff that has a good market research. And right now we're tactically targeting specific pillars that make sense either in a procurement and reusing what we already have. So building that journey, bringing industry in to help guide us, educate us, and be a part of that journey has been pretty fruitful.
Excellent. So any example of collaboration, government and industry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what comes to mind, so my team is supporting CISA with a bunch of zero trust activities to ultimately support federal civilian executive branch agencies. And what we find is that, kind of like Rob described, the human element is really important. It's oftentimes the people is the harder challenge, not the technology. And so as we roll out capabilities to agencies, we find that different agencies respond very differently to what's essentially the same proposed solution. And that collaboration really needs to be there. And our partners from CISA have been great about understanding their need to collaborate. I think that's one of the things that is kind of part of their fabric, as they fundamentally don't own that challenge on their own. They know they need to collaborate, but we'll work with various agencies, and certain agencies they're engaged and they're energized and they're all in on certain things, and then a different agency may respond differently. And so we all have to kind of figure out, okay, how do we make this work given the constraints of that particular agency? What are they going through? How do we jointly collaborate with them in order to address their challenge? Because it's often the people that are the hardest part.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure there's a question from the audience about how do you collaborate on that topic. All right, sounds good. I would like to talk briefly about something that I really, actually, David Larimore, DHCTO, really wanted to be here and wanted to participate, looking forward to it. Unfortunately, not able to join, but something that he was talking, and your role as CTO and you are technology leader, there is no federal CTO. There is no federal government level chief technology officer. I'm sure as your job, and you are the first CTO of UCIS, obviously there was something that was not there before you took on, and there was a lot of value add. I'm sure other federal agencies who may not have a CTO, like what are they missing? The fact that you don't have this one person who's focusing on this important technology aspects.
Okay, this will be my own opinion. I might turn my mic up. I think there was a gap. The gap was, and there's anecdotes here that some people may not want to hear, but I think the gap was just a general understanding of technology and where it was going and how it could actually be applied. Again, the example I've got is numerous business units that had their favorite IT group that would just deliver. And they would hire their favorite contractors. And, not saying that everybody's of this way, but some groups would do a lot of bilking and leading by the nose. I think that was part of it. So there was a little bit of like, let's do a little bit of trust and verify an IV and VM what's really going on, which is important. We're getting the best bang for our buck here, and we being led down to some sort of vendor lock-in, or so having a little bit of strategy, but also the ability to have the tactical ability to, as you've already stated, to do some firefighting. And the sort of the mantra that I like to use with the teams is JDFI, just friggin' do it. So the ability to work across and provide horizontal delivery as opposed to these silos was, I think, also missing, and still is, and I think a lot of groups that I speak to in the government. So the ability to do horizontal delivery and the ability to cut out some of the compliance and bureaucracy is sort of where I think where I am and am providing some value.
Absolutely. I think, Rob certainly has done a very good thing because I'm at USCI, so I can see that directly. But definitely that role is very valuable, at least from my experience. But I will go to Clay. So Clay, you interact with obviously many federal agencies. Like, what do you see when there is no CTO? I'm not necessarily saying CIO is not able to do everything, but there's something unique the CTO gets, the mindset and the experience from the prior job. So what is your experience?
Yeah, so I think it depends a lot on who the CIO is and what their background is. But the CIO job can be very administrative at times. There's a lot of operations in it. The CIO is responsible for making sure that email is up and running and network connectivity is available, and signing off on ATOs and looking at the budget and all sorts of other operations beyond the technology itself. And so it's easy for a CIO to get busy with all those other things. And therefore, it's nice for that CIO to have a partnership with a CTO who can really be focused on the technology and not be worried about as many of those other things, and who can, if they trust each other and they can work well together, then that partnership can be very, very effective, where the CTO can say, hey, I've been looking at this particular capability, and I think there's something new that we can do to innovate in that area.
I was on the
That's a great
phone in the
point.
back with my CIO. He just called me right up. Get on this call, buddy. Need your help.
Hey, no, but it's still partnership, right? Your CIO wants to talk to
It
you.
has
It's
to
still
be.
partnership.
Just like
And the
anybody.
collaboration. All right. I think so that was great. And I know you mentioned about your mantra, Rob. So I would like to go to you. Like, what's your mantra in your role in your organization that you follow on a daily basis? Like to share with the
Yeah,
folks
so
here.
at this point in my career, I'm focused on being able to give back in various ways. And one of those, and I admit this was not natural for me at all until a couple of years ago when I really focused on it. One of those is supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was always taught growing up to stay silent and not talk about the differences among people, in the workplace. And it really took some significant events, including the death of George Floyd, before I was comfortable saying anything. And I started writing, and then eventually I got comfortable having some conversations about that. And so I think that's an area that requires a lot of emphasis. More generally, mentorship is another area. I try to put a lot of my energy and attention into mentoring people, both within CGI as well as within the federal marketplace. It's one of the reasons why I participate in the ACT-IAC professional development programs as one of the vice chairs, is because I can provide some of that experience to others and help them to get a leg up as they try to grow their careers.
And great point. I mean, diversity, inclusion, all of that. I mean, obviously there's it's a new priority and focus, and I know working groups and all of that is happening. But yeah, it's a great point. Anything to add on top of that?
I guess really just as Earthlings, foster curiosity. I mean, I think that's probably a good MO to have. Continue to foster curiosity, because as soon as you see somebody lose that curiosity, the innovation lights are out.
That's right. That's the fire going. But once you get the fire starts, Absolutely, absolutely. On the same lines, on the bottom of the fire, what keeps you up at night in terms of this bothers me? You know, this is something that maybe nobody's thinking about in the agency. You know, why not something like that? You have something like that on your mind, Rob? Start with you.
Well,
keeps
there's a
you up at night?
lot, but I'm so glad I don't do operations. Jeez. There's plenty. So sometimes it's something as simple as just a human interaction that I had previously, or it could even be something as, is that ATO going to actually happen so I can move to the next stage. So it does depend, but a lot of times it's really I'm trying to think ahead and make sure that a lot of the foundational elements are actually still moving along, still flowing appropriately. So it depends upon the situation, but usually it's within that construct of ensuring that those foundational elements are being hit, or those targets are being hit, so that that next step or that future can actually be met. The example right now is just a collaboration, a new way of doing some data sharing amongst DHS and really amongst other federal agencies that can save money, that is safe and fast. So just making sure that that some of these security components are done, so I can finally get my ATO and start, doing real-time data sharing with CBP.
That's excellent news. I will get to you on the same question. What keeps you up at night?
So growth is really the thing that keeps me up at night, because growth solves so many challenges. It provides opportunities for our people who are working on a project and they're looking for something new to do, and they just want to satisfy their curiosity. They want to grow their careers. It provides opportunities for our clients, for us to bring in new things to a client that we've been working with for a while, based upon something we've learned from a client that we're newly working with. And I work for a publicly traded company, and so growth also satisfies the shareholders who are looking for revenue and earnings per share ultimately. So I think growth is really that thing that I am thinking about a lot at night.
All right, great. I would just, before we get to the questions from the audience, I'm sure there'll be questions. What would be your closing statement on the topic on innovation culture? Like, can you summarize or something? It's a call for action or something? Anybody?
I could start. I mean, I think that the thing that I would emphasize is to have those conversations, talk with people, attend industry days, attend reverse industry days, attend conferences, talk with your peers, talk with your supervisor, talk with people who are reporting to you. The more of those conversations that occur, the easier it is to kind of understand the challenges and ultimately to then come up with ideas of how to innovate. So that would be my recommendation.
I would just say share. Don't be afraid to share. So at least from within USCIS, seeing people share in whatever way is the spirit, along with curiosity, really is the spirit of innovation. And so ensuring that folks can do that safely, I think is really ultimately what helps provide us to innovate. Manifested in various facets, from tech talks to white papers, to actually getting hands into the mud and making some mud pies, and being able to provide that to the technologists as well as to other folks. So a little bit of democratization there as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to hear. I think it's a lot of what I'm hearing is sharing, and not just being by yourself on an island, track, learn, grow, all of that. So that sounds great. Fantastic. Let's get to the questions from the audience. We have any questions? Somebody can give you the mic.
Chad here from Net Impact Strategies. Question for you. You talked about a lot of the things that work, right? Or good things to do. What about the things that don't work, or minefields to avoid? What are the downsides of things that you shouldn't do, or things that go wrong that you need to get around?
So one thing that comes to mind is that if you're going to have a culture where people are encouraged to take risks, you need to make sure that you're recognizing people for taking the risk and not piling on and saying, oh, wow, that was a really bad turnout and that didn't work at all. Because as soon as that happens, then the next person is afraid to take a risk. So you really need to celebrate the fact that somebody took a risk, even if that risk didn't work out, in order to encourage people to kind of get out of their box a little bit and be comfortable taking that risk.
Again, the silo building, which could be manifested in various facets, the bureaucracy that can overtake, and sometimes it's not even knowing that it's overtaking you. So having a conscious eye towards that, but the bureaucracy is probably one of the worst killers, and it could manifest itself in a simple IT process to a business process. And it's amazing how folks can latch onto that. So abating that, or at least finding, I think automation can help with a lot of that. But having an eye towards that is right now some of the fights I've got. Because you'd be surprised how many people latch onto that bureaucratic, safety blanket.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else?
Hi, Anne-Marie Johnson with CGI Federal. I'd like to thank all of you for a truly fantastic conversation. And it's just so fascinating to be able to sit here in an audience and not see it on a box on the screen, but real live human beings. So thank you for that. I've been reflecting throughout your conversation about people and process and technology. And those of us who've grown up in this field, those are the things that we think about. But I'm curious to get your reflections on people being the reason why we have the processes and the technology, and that those processes and technologies truly are the tools that we, the people, are using to do something of value to us. And kind of rolling into that, this idea that comes from customer experience, that it's about the human journey and what we're trying to accomplish, and how those processes and the technology allow us to live a more prosperous and vibrant life.
Thanks for this.
So it's a good question. And I feel, and I think it's obviously it's well known, considering some of the current directorates or directives as it relates to CX UX. So how do you manifest that so it becomes pervasive in an organization? Unfortunately, there's still a lot of, it's not the shoulds, there's still a lot of shalls to motivate folks. So within USCIS, we have the ability to create management instructions, which essentially equates to a policy. So we do have a CX UX policy, but to make it effective, because you can read any policy and ignore it, or without sort of that trust but verify, or an IV&V, who cares? So how do you actually get people jazzed about it? And how do you start to see it move and sort of overtake the organization? To your point, and it's really important. So people do like to have some tangible bits to actually see it work. So some of the artifacts that we've created is, leveraging what already exists, is sort of wrapping a design system, so that when folks are building things, it's not red, green, and blue and pink with polka dots, or it's such a mess, which does exist. The whole swivel chair notion of somebody just trying to do their job and going from screen to screen to screen, or having to open up a new URL, like, no thanks. So some of the constructs in the design system, and then just basic best practices, are what we're moving forward with to help address that at the OIT level. But we're creating this so that it is, especially in what we see as the new wake for democratizing IT to the Gen Pop, that this becomes something that is leveraged across the organization. So it's not just within the confines of OIT, but it is across the organization, and hope to share that with all of DHS, because I know that they're trying to do the same thing. So those are a couple of the things that we're working towards. And the other is just good metrics, so we can track this. And then good feedback. So we do a lot of activities with real people in the field before we build something, during, after, and that's been hugely successful in us delivering better product, providing a better customer experience. And then it's also about getting those human relations and those pathways established so that it's constant.
Anne Marie, as you were asking your question, which I'll call a stumper, it's okay. I was thinking about kind of the days when the IT systems that I was building and implementing were replacing non-IT systems. So one of the first systems that I worked on, we replaced a binder of documents. And the process of replacing a binder of documents is great because anything you do is so much better than having to keep that binder up to date and having to leaf through that binder when you're trying to find it. And we've come such a long way. The expectations that we all have for how things operate are so much different than they were 25 years ago when replacing a binder of documents was a pretty low bar. Now, the technology wasn't as capable back then, so it was a higher bar than it may seem to us now. But today, it's all about customer experience and counting the number of clicks and how many tabs you need to open and all these other factors, because we're trying to get through things quicker and quicker and quicker and have it be efficient and still comply with all the shalls of having a standardized data set and clean data that you can use to run reports and all those other things that are fun that come into it. So I think it's just about a continued evolution and understanding how we can do better and better while recognizing how far we've come.
A great example based upon exactly that. So we actually got off of the mainframe, a few years ago. And from a customer experience perspective, because our adjudicators had such muscle memory to that mainframe, we built a UI that looked like the mainframe.
Oh, God. I would call it lift and shift, if you will.
Very much so.
All right, thanks for the question.
It was also pretty cheap. Not a whole lot of training.
Thank you for the question, Anne Marie. Next question, anyone else?
That was a great comment. So innovation always, not always driven by technology, but it is by the people mindset and also organizational culture. So how do you see as leaders in this, in the industry, to bring all these three pieces together to make the innovation happen in an organization? Because innovation has to be very swift. It cannot take ages for making things happen. By the time the technology changes, you have to catch up on the capabilities and then deliver solutions. So how do you see these three parameters from your point of view?
Well, I didn't catch all of that, so I apologize. So I'll do my best. So some of the things that we've experimented with in the past is standing up innovation labs. That has, and not just one innovation lab, but innovation labs amongst different disciplines within the organization. And have let some contracts out, some of which have been pretty relatively innovative to do so. And part of the innovation lab is to do exactly that, to bring in, similar to what we were doing with the example of Zero Trust, was to bring in industry and establish partnerships and test. About 4 years ago, I think it was, as an example, to help drive or spur some of that on, we were looking at speech to text. One of our requirements, especially now with an AO rule coming at the end of the month, we have to record all the audio in the interviews that we do with refugees and asylees. So we wanted to make this, and back to customer experience and user experience, wanted to make this easier for the adjudicators and the transcribers, because they would spend half a day just transcribing notes from the interview. So we ended up going across all of the the 3 primary CSPs, working with those CSPs as well as other industry to actually come up with some core metrics and identify which was the best and where it would fit best to solve that problem. And back then that was, I guess, relatively innovative. And now we're looking at it again. It's very cool to see with those contracts, with that sort of innovation groups doing this work, where they were and where things are now, and bringing it together to solve a real world problem that we've got.
What I would add to that, and I see Soraya's in the front of the room, and so I'm thinking about contracts and how they impact innovation. If the government lets out an LPTA contract and says, this is what we want, give us the bare minimum, there's not usually a ton of room in that contract for innovation. But if the contract is set up in a way to encourage innovation, then the people who want to innovate and the technology which is capable of being used to be innovated can be leveraged. And so we've got some cost plus contracts, for example, where we regularly bring to our government customers the ideas that our team has, and we're encouraging our team to bring ideas. And some of them they take a look at and they say, I don't think that's going to work. But others of them they say, yeah, that looks great. And how soon can we get that done? Or how quickly can you give me an estimate for what it'll take to make that happen? And I think just the structure that's in place is either enabling the innovation, or in some cases it's disabling the innovation, all just based upon what's written on a piece of paper that is established, a year plus in advance of performance.
Building in.
Let the record show that Soraya says do not use LPTA.
Yep, we heard about that. Yep. I think we'll wrap it up. I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation, very insightful thoughts, observations, and great to hear from industry leaders and federal government leaders on a topic that we don't talk about a whole lot, but it's really important for so many aspects of IT industry and all that. So with that, I would like to thank ACT-IAC for setting up a fantastic event. I'd like to thank Rob Brown and Clay for making valuable time for us out of a busy schedule. Yeah, let's give a round of applause to Rob and Clay.
Thanks, Sashi. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all for hanging in there. It was a great conversation, a great meeting. There's still a reception to do. I have 2 slides to show you though, real quick. Just a reminder. Well, there's a bunch of stuff. So there's stuff going on all the time at ACT-IAC. We don't have time to go over all those things, but check out the website so you can make sure you're not missing out on any of the important meetings that are coming up. Next slide. So the Emerging Technology Innovation Conference, just 2 weeks away down in Cambridge, Maryland. If you haven't had a chance to register yet, we'd love to see you there. We've got some great speakers, outstanding leaders from DHS and GSA and DOD and the Army and many other agencies. And we'll be giving out the Innovation Awards. You won't want to miss out on that. And of course, Voyagers will be having their graduation there. So you can click on the QR code and register right now as you go to the reception. But wait, there's more. Next slide. It's time to start planning for ELC. So if you're interested in planning for Imagination ELC this year, our industry chair, Kendall Holbrook, is here in the room, as is Keisha Powell, our events magician extraordinaire. And so either one of them will be happy to get you signed up, or you could click on the QR code and register yourself to be a member of the volunteer team. Thank you so much for being here with us. We've got a reception, I think, right here. So see you next door.